Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. If you're an economics nerd, and if you're listening, you probably are, you might be interested in the Australia Institute's Revenue Summit for 2025, which will be at Parliament House in Canberra on Wednesday the 29th of October. We've just announced the lineup of speakers, which includes former Queensland Premier Stephen Miles, Senator David Pocock, Kate Cheney, economist Saul Eslake, Jordan van der Lam, aka Purple Pingers, and our very own Greg Jericho, and more. Early bird special tickets are on sale now, so go to australiainstitute.org.au to get yours. I'm Elinor Johnston-Leake, the Senior Content Producer here at the Australia Institute, and while Greg Jericho is still away on holiday in Europe, we've got back again Senior Economist Matt Grudnoff.
Great to see you again, Elinor.
Great to see you too, Matt. So Matt, there's some big news out this week. The headline was, inflation has resurged to 2.8%.
After I was saying it was under control for so long.
Matt, did you get a bit of ahead of yourself there? Will you have to go back on your word and admit maybe the RBA was right?
No, never.
No. Are you just being stubborn?
Look, so there are a number of things.
Okay.
The first thing is, this is monthly inflation. Monthly inflation figures are crap. Even the RBA thinks they're crap. Basically, the quarterly inflation figures, the quarterly CPI, they're the good quality ones that we've had for a long, long time. They're the ones that the Reserve Bank looks at. The monthly figures are a new series that the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, is building up, and they're making them better all the time. But at the moment, they don't fully measure everything every month. And so these figures, there's a number of things going on that mean it's surged that aren't really of concern. So the big one is that there was a drop-off in some of the electricity subsidies in certain states, including the ACT in New South Wales, didn't get their federal subsidy in July. So this was just for the month of July. They will have them in August. So what does that mean? Electricity prices shoot up in July and they crash back down in August. The school holidays was in July. One of the things that also surged was holiday travel and accommodation. What do airlines and hotels do during school holidays? They increase their prices.
Yep.
What do they do straight after holidays? They bring them back down. So we're going to, again, see a big jump in July, but then they're all going to crash back down. Again, none of these are things that the RBA is going to worry about. The RBA, like the ABS, have said that the monthly figures aren't really what they look at. And so therefore, the RBA are not likely to be concerned by this or make a decision based on this. So certainly there was a lot of worry that, interest rates might not come back down or might even have to rise. That's highly unlikely. I think still, again, after the next quarterly figures come out in late October, the next RBA meeting after that is November. Almost certainly, if we're going to see a rate cut, that will be the meeting we see. And that follows the pattern for the entire year. We've had 3 rate cuts, one in February, which was just after the quarterly release, one in May, just after the quarterly release, one in August, just after the quarterly release. The next quarterly release, November.
Okay, so we shouldn't be worried about, a surge back up in inflation at all. This is just...
No, it's kind of weird stuff happening in the numbers that's not actually represented in what's happening in the real world, or it's not the kind of inflation that the RBA are going to be particularly worried about. The other thing to remember is the ABS are making the monthly figures better, and in coming months, eventually it will be as good as the quarterly, and then that will probably be our main measure of inflation. So things are getting better in the monthly figures, but we're not quite there yet.
So the headlines of a surge, maybe a bit of an overreaction. Let's just hold our horses.
Yeah, a bit premature.
Okay.
While low-income Australians are struggling to make ends meet, our energy companies, on the other hand, and our banks, what's new in our banks, and big tech, are making absolute mozza. You could shower us all in your cash.
When you get such a bad sort of brand hit like this, you'd hope that consumers are able to, as they say, vote with your feet, but your feet really can't take you anywhere else except for Coles or Woolies.
Research from the Australian Institute late last year shows just how much Australia's 2 biggest energy retailers are gouging from Aussie customers. More than a third of what Australians pay AGL and Origin for electricity is pure profit for them companies. Pure profit.
In the European Union, Price gouging by big corporations is banned right across the economy, and that's what we need to do here in Australia.
Also in the news this week, Matt, the Greens have reintroduced 2 bills into Parliament, one to give the ACCC divestiture powers to break up corporations when they misuse market power, and the other one is to make price gouging illegal in Australia. So this comes in the wake of, we've talked about a few companies making massive profits.
They've been doing quite well.
Yeah. As we talked about recently, the Commonwealth Bank posted a $10 billion profit, which was the highest they'd made in at least a decade. And then just recently, the insurance company IAG posted $1.35 billion net profit, which is apparently a 66% increase.
Yeah, they're doing well.
Yeah, Matt, how is it at all possible to make a 66% increase in profit? That's insane.
Well, if you have any kind of insurance, you may have noticed,
Matt,
recently,
I'm not enough of an adult to do that.
Well, all of our listeners out there who have insurance,
Yep.
You may have noticed that the premiums have been going up a lot. And, there's been talk that climate change disasters are becoming more frequent, which is absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so therefore the cost of insurance needs to go up. But you also might remember, if you go back even further, when we had that first outbreak of inflation, a lot of businesses said, well, there's, a massive increase in costs because there's a lot of inflation, so we have to put our prices up. But then they ended up putting up their prices by more than what the cost increase was, and their profits went up. In particular, you might remember the huge debate around the major supermarkets, the 2 big supermarkets, and their claims of price gouging. Well, sure, our costs may have gone up by, say, 10%, but we've increased our prices by 20%.
Yeah, but as a consumer, when everything's just going up, you go, well, I guess everything's just more expensive now.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And so that's what we might be seeing here. Firms, again, basically increasing prices by more than the cost. And how do we know whether that's happening? Well, at the end of the year, you look and you see what happens to their profits. And if their profits shoot up, then that's probably what's happening. And, that's exactly what the Greens legislation is designed to stop. So most people might think, well, profit gouging is illegal, but it's actually not illegal.
Yeah. Well, my question is, how can you make price gouging illegal? Because, companies make money. That's their goal. What is the line when it comes to price gouging?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably something that you would empower the ACCC to look at. So you're right, it's a grey area, but there are certainly ways that the ACCC have of looking into opening up the books of big firms that they suspect of price gouging, looking at how their costs have changed and how their prices have changed, and making a determination, and then presumably they would then take their evidence to court. The company could then contest it in court, and a judge would be there to decide whether or not they had actually engaged in price gouging in exactly the same way as other anti-competitive behaviour.
But what actually makes something price gouging over just making a profit?
Yeah, so there's a whole sort of field of economics that talks about reasonable rates of return and what is excessive profits, what are super profits. And inside the legislation, there would need to be thresholds put in, and the ACCC would then need to convince the court that a particular business had gone beyond a reasonable rate of return and had actually engaged in price gouging.
And then just going back to the other part of the bills, divestiture powers, breaking up the corporations, what would be involved in that?
Yeah, so the idea of divestiture powers, which are laws that actually exist in places like the US and the UK, is when you have a large firm or a couple of large firms that dominate a market.
Like Coles and Woolworths.
Like Coles and Woolies, like 4 big banks, like, 2 big insurance companies, like lots of different, two airlines, like lots of different industries in Australia. You have a situation where it's really difficult for a new competitor to come in because the other competitor or the other competitors basically just force them out. They already dominate the market. It's difficult for them to set up. For a period of time, the incumbent firms can lower their prices and basically drive the new entrant out.
So incumbents just are the ones that already exist.
Yeah, incumbents are the firms already in the market. So how do you get more firms into the market? Because competition involves lots of firms all competing against each other.
And competition is good for people who are buying their products.
And the more competitive it is, the harder it is for firms to price gouge, the harder it is to take advantage of customers, to treat them poorly. You have to, your local cafe has to treat you well, because if they don't, you will walk another 50 metres down the road to their competitor who will treat them well. So that's why competition is good. So how do you, in these situations where you don't have competition and you just have a few big firms, how do you actually introduce competition? Well, one of the ways is you force the big firms to break up. So imagine instead of the big four banks, you had 10 moderately sized banks, as in you took the big four and you broke them up into 10 different banks, and then those banks competed amongst themselves, you would get a better outcome. Same with supermarkets. If you broke the big supermarkets up into smaller supermarkets that then were forced to compete against each other. And it's important to say that it's not just, one day the government or the ACCC comes along and says, okay, now you have to break up. There's a whole process involved. They would have to go to court and convince a judge that, there was a lack of competition in the market, that lack of competition was because there weren't enough firms. And then basically a court would determine whether or not to apply those divestiture powers. But it is a great stick. And it also actually works even if you never use it. So at the moment, price gouging is not illegal and there are no divestiture powers. So if you're Coles or Woolies, you don't have to worry about price gouging and you don't have to worry about being broken up. But imagine if both of those powers were in place, then Coles and Woolies would be worrying about whether or not they're price gouging. And also, even if they could get away with it, they'd be worried that sometime down the line that, people would get really annoyed during a cost of living crisis. For a while there, they were hated when prices were rising, and they'd be worried that, they would get taken to court and they would get broken up. And so that then restrains their behaviour. It stops them. So even if you don't actually break them up, it makes them think twice about increasing their prices and gouging their customers.
Is there some benefit there as well in that a lot of these giant companies, Coles and Woolworths, things like Qantas, they do operate in sectors that are really important. And if something were to happen to one of these companies, I'm thinking like in the GFC, these investment firms that were just too big to fail, and then they failed, and then what happened to the economy? Is there a benefit in breaking up these companies to then, have some more resilience in these sectors?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've got two firms that say dominate in a market, if one of them fails, that's catastrophic. One, for competition, because then you effectively have a virtual monopoly, which is a company that can really take advantage of its customers. But also they service a huge part of the market. So if they suddenly fail, and they're an essential item like, say, groceries or something like that, then suddenly big parts of Australia might not be able to access easily groceries. Whereas if you have lots of smaller firms that are competing in the market, then if one of them does have a catastrophic failure, then it's not as massive. And also the pressure is then not on the government to come in and use taxpayer money to bail it out. So if Coles had some massive corporate or financial scandal and for some reason was about to go broke, right? Or Woolworths, doesn't matter, but just imagine that happened. Can you imagine the pressure on the federal government to stop that from happening, to step in and give as much public money as it cost to make sure that people could go to their local shops and buy groceries?
Yeah.
There'd be huge pressure. And so it doesn't only inoculate people against that kind of risk, it also inoculates the taxpayer effectively against that kind of risk.
This morning, global mail carriers suspending deliveries to the U.S.
Australia Post has taken the extraordinary step of immediately suspending many forms of postage to the United States.
That decision being blamed on U.S. President Donald Trump's recent tariff charges.
Postal services in Australia, India, New Zealand, the U.K. and parts of Europe say they will stop shipping parcels to the States before the end of a trade exemption known as de minimis, which since 2016 had allowed goods worth up to $800 to enter the U.S. duty-free.
And Matt, we've got some time for Tariff Corner, but...
Tariff Corner is back.
Tariff Corner's back, but with a surprisingly domestic twist this time.
Yeah.
Australia Post has temporarily halted some postage to the US, effective immediately, until further notice, for parcels between $100 and $800 value. Also, Japan and Switzerland have done something similar.
Yeah,
Matt,
lots of different ones all over the world
Yeah.
are doing this, yeah.
what's going on here?
Yeah, so previously, if you had something worth less than $800, it was tariff-free. So imagine
If you were posting something.
If you're posting something, yep. So imagine, you're in the US and you buy something on Temu or something like that, and it's less than $800, it's not going to be subject to the tariff. The US government has changed that. Trump has changed that, and he's reduced that threshold down to $100. And so what does it mean? Well, it means that there are all kinds of packages that are going to have to be tariffed as they go in, but the group that's got to collect that tariff is effectively the delivery company like Australia Post. But they're not set up to do that. They're not set up to be able to collect that at the moment. And so they need to put in place systems to allow them to collect that tariff. And so because they don't have that system, because Trump has basically just sprung this.
As he usually does
as
with
he
the
usually
tariffs.
does, they don't have the capacity to collect it. And so what they're basically saying is, you can't post anything to the US because we can't collect the tariff and we're responsible for it. So therefore, it's off the cards until we can partner up with somebody who is able to collect that as it goes through. And this is really important. So you might hear economists like myself and Greg say that, we think the tariffs are a bad idea.
I think I might have heard that a few times from you and Greg, yes.
We need to clarify that tariffs do have pros. It's just that the cons, we think, outweigh the pros. So you could actually introduce tariffs and there are good aspects of it. So the idea of tariffs is to convince people who buy stuff and who make stuff to do it in the US, in the Trump case. So the idea is that you put a tariff on and then rather than buying stuff overseas, they make it in the US. But to do that, there are good ways and bad ways to impose tariffs. So if that was your aim, and that's what Trump says his aim is, what you would do is you would give everybody plenty of notice is the first thing. If you spring tariffs on countries and on goods, then firms don't have enough time to set up in the country that they want to set up in. They don't have time to change how they produce things. Effectively, what they do is the customer just ends up paying the tariff and there's no change in behavior. And so, if you were going to impose tariffs, you might give them a 2-year lead time and say, look, in 2 years' time, we're going to impose this tariff. It's going to stay at exactly this rate for as long, way off into the future. So you give them certainty. What we want you to do is come and set up in the country. And in 2 years' time, if you're set up and ready to go, then you'll reap the reward of producing in the US rather than overseas. So you create a lot of certainty. If you are setting up tariffs the wrong way to do it, then you would basically spring it on people. You would, basically give them very little warning. You would change the tariffs. If you're thinking as a company, do I want to set up in the US and take advantage of the fact that I won't have tariffs? What you want to know is that tariff going to stay the same? Can I count on that tariff being there in a year's time? Because if you spend, say, $100 million and set up a new steel mill in the US, and suddenly the president decides the next day, oh, he's made a deal with some country and now they've been exempt from the tariffs or the tariffs changed or something like that. You've just blown $100 million, right? And that's a big decision and a big cost to your company. So again, there's a good way and a bad way of doing it. And Trump is doing it the bad way.
The fact that we have Tariff Corner in that it's changing almost every week, I think this is a good indication he's doing it the bad way.
If you were to write a book on how not to do tariffs, then you would just have to follow what Trump has done.
It would be one page, follow what Trump's doing.
Just do what Trump does. And that is absolutely the wrong way. So, there are pros and cons to all kinds of different things that economists talk about. In balance, we think tariffs are a bad idea, but that's not to say that tariffs don't have their pros. But even if you were to think, yes, the pros outweigh the cons, the way Trump is doing it is entirely the wrong way. And this, Australia Post and the Post in Japan and Germany and all these other countries is the classic example of why it is bad. Springing things with little notice when organizations don't have the capacity to change, all it does is hurt American customers. So who's going to ultimately get hurt by these parcels not being able to deliver to the US? People in the US.
Well, it's because it's the parcels, especially for that $100 to $800 value. That's not really big companies. That's people ordering things online.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Matt. Great to have another chat about tariffs.
Thank you again for talking with me. And just a reminder, don't forget about the Revenue Summit.
Yes.
Elinor will be there. I'll be there. Greg will be there. Please come up and say hi if you're coming along.
Yeah. Get your tickets at australiainstitute.org.au. This episode of Dollars and Cents was recorded on Thursday, the 28th of August. And if you want to look at any of the Australia Institute, including Matt's research into things like price gouging, divestiture, interest rates, you can go to australiainstitute.org.au. Music, as always, is from Blue Dot Sessions. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.